You're listening to Glove Up or Shut Up on the Angry Marks Podcast Network.
Glove Up or Shut Up right here on AngryMarks.com. My name is Peter H. I'm joined once again by my co-host from Omaha, Nebraska, Stevie J.
This is our commitment to you, the listener. Even though we've both had long days with egregious work schedules, we are still here recording a show just for you to talk about the world of mixed martial arts. How you doing, Peter?
I'm doing okay. Toronto beat the Indians. I'm good.
Yeah, well, as long as the Blue Jays are still in the hunt, right? That's how I feel about my Cubbies.
Can you imagine a Blue Jays Cub World Series?
Hey, it could happen.
Could happen. Alright, so let's move on. We got lots of news to get to, and we also have Bellator 162 to talk about with a very interesting main event. But let's start with the news, and I have a bunch of news, but there's no real order this week, so we're just gonna go random hits, Stevie.
Sure.
Stefan Struve wants to fight Josh Barnett. Do you think it's a case of Barnett's getting too old and Struve is thinking I can beat this guy?
I don't know if he thinks he's vulnerable in that respect, but I do think it's at least arguable that Josh Barnett might be past his prime. I would not go so far as to say he is. He did submit Andrei Arlovsky, so make of that what you will.
Alright, so they've announced that ticket prices for the Tough 24 finale, cage side. How much do you think they're going for?
$100.
$350.
Oh, that's right. New ownership, WME IMG. That's gonna raise prices up because they're in debt.
Bellator 169 in Ireland. Main event has been announced. It's King Mo against Satoshi Ishii.
That's right. And that's gonna take place in Dublin.
Ooh, that's a good market.
Mm-hmm. That's why they moved the Strabonimal James Gallagher from the show in Tel Aviv, Israel, to the card in Dublin. They want the local favorite on the local show.
He'll get one hell of a pop, that's for sure.
Oh, yes.
Now, what do you make of this story that Conor McGregor, because of his fine he got for the water bottle incident, he says he will no longer fight in Vegas?
Well, it's interesting because the original fine was reported to be $150,000, and then apparently the commission came back later and said, well, actually it's $75,000, and we're valuing the community service that he does at $75,000. So it's actually only a $75,000 fine, and considering he probably made $10 million for that pay-per-view, then he should just pay the fine and shut up.
I think he has that in his couch cushions.
Probably at this point he has it on his wardrobe, just walking around in those suits he wears.
Alright, so it's been rumored for a while. Finally was announced this past week. Ronda Rousey, Amanda Nunes, UFC 207 main event.
And boy, did that piss some people off.
Mm-hmm.
You want to
What
run
do you
down
think
the
of
list?
this fight?
You want to run down the list of people who are angry about it?
Do we have enough time on the show?
Well, I'd say at least half of the top 10 of the bantamweights.
Well, I
know Juliana Pena was really mega pissed.
what about Tate and Holm and, I mean,
yeah,
just some of the other fighters in there. I mean, it's just,
They all feel like they're being passed over for Rousey, but Rousey is a bigger star than any of them, so I don't see where they get off arguing about it.
Stars make fights, but do stars automatically get title shots?
If George St. Pierre were fighting tomorrow, he'd get a title shot, but I know you want to talk about that story.
We'll get there.
Oh, we're gonna wait,
Actually, that's my next item. Both Jose Aldo and George St. Pierre, looks like their contracts are over or terminated or what have you, because Jose was saying after Conor announced he's fighting later this year at the main event, I believe it's in New York City, that's it, I'm done, cancel my contract. And with GSP, he was working on a deal with Lorenzo. Basically, he told his lawyer, I want a deadline set. The deadline passed, deal wasn't done, and the lawyer told GSP he's now a free agent, and UFC is like, whoa, we've got you under contract, you ain't going anywhere.
Well, that's almost the whole story. You left out a couple of details that I'll add just to clarify things. The reason GSP was negotiating directly with Lorenzo Fertitta is because the Reebok sponsorship prevented him from collecting money from all the sponsors he previously had, and GSP's terms for coming back were, you've got to make up the difference in the amount of money you pay me per fight. So he and Lorenzo had a deal that was all but worked out before UFC was sold to WME-IMG, and WME-IMG decided they weren't going to follow through on the terms that had already been negotiated, and since Lorenzo had already sold and no longer had a say in anything, what was he going to do about it? So that's when GSP got his attorney and said, you either agree to the terms I already worked out with Lorenzo, or my high-powered attorney is going to terminate the contract. And he says he's no longer under contract now and he's a free agent, and like you said, UFC begs to differ.
They're saying something about how they'd have to invest money on reintroducing GSP to the audience. I don't know who said that to either GSP or GSP's attorney, but I hope they carry a shovel when they walk.
I don't think you have to reintroduce GSP to anybody. I think that's ridiculous. In fact, when GSP was interviewed about this whole debacle, he said, and it's interesting the way that he worded this, he said, they don't know what a fighter is. I know what a fighter is. I know what the fight audience wants. I know what a fighter wants to do. Them telling me that I don't want to fight and that nobody knows I want to fight is just ridiculous. But Dana White is a great promoter. He's great at promoting the sport. None of us would have a job if it weren't for Dana White. So he was kind of throwing UFC under the bus and then leaving himself a little glimmer of an opening there at the end. Like, you know what? I still like Dana White. I still respect him, but this is a mess.
They offered him Robbie Lawler, and GSP's like, you do know that he's hurt, right? Like, he have to pull out of his fight he's scheduled for, and he's hurt. Like,
I'm glad you brought that detail up too, because I think that was another reason they decided the contract was terminated. Like, you're offering me a fight with a guy who can't even fight right now, so you're not really offering me a fight at all.
And that fight was slated, rumored to be Toronto.
Well,
alright. Well, we should move on.
Yes, we should move on.
Paige Van Zandt against the Karate Hottie at UFC Fox 22.
Well, that is the main event of that show, so they're trying to prove whether or not Paige Van Zandt is a draw all on her own.
Be interesting to see the ratings on that one. And Karate Hottie is definitely a good fight to have.
Yeah, she's a very quality fighter and has been for some time, so I look forward to that fight, because if Paige Van Zandt gets through her, that's a real test.
UFC 206 in Toronto, we mentioned main event was rumored to be GSP's return, but obviously that fell through the cracks. Cormier versus Johnson 2.
That's right. Rumble gets another crack.
It's a heck of a fight there too. Now, you might know more about this story than I do, so I might have to defer the floor to you, but Antonio McKee wants to fight on the same card as his son AJ.
Well, that's really up to Bellator. They are the ones who can make those kind of decisions. Obviously, they think very highly of AJ McKee because they signed him to a multi-fight extension, and they keep featuring him in fights on main cards on Spike TV, even though he's very young in his career. So it's really up to them whether they want the dad and the son on the same show. They're the ones that have to make that call.
All right, so I'm going to bring you back to UFC 204 just for a second.
Sure.
The very first fight, Martins and Santos. In the first round, there were only 2 judges.
Why did that happen?
The third seat was empty, and Mark Ratner noticed this, and there was another judge sitting in the first row of the, press row, and asked the guy, can you sit in and judge the rest of this fight? And did you see enough of the first round to give a comprehensive judgment of the first round? The guy's like, yes. So they got a third guy to jump in from the judges who were watching the fight, and the fight went to a decision, and Santos won that fight, and Martins is now filing an appeal saying, how can I have lost the fight if there were only 2 judges at cage side? The third one watched the first from the front row of, press row, basically.
You're still not telling me why there were only 2 judges. What happened to the
That's
third?
the thing. No one knows. The guy didn't show up. The guy was caught in traffic. I don't know.
Well,
there's actually one of the photographers who was sitting cage side, whose seat was next to the empty seat, tweeted out, there's only 2 judges here. And after the first round, oh, no, we're back, we're good.
So, I just don't understand what's the problem with the appeal here. Did the third judge they pulled from press row, did he score it differently than the other 2?
I don't believe so. I think it was a unanimous decision, or it might have been split decision. But the point is, with 2 judges there, I mean, you could have a third guy who was sitting elsewhere, but he wasn't sitting where the judge is supposed to sit.
So his protest is more that the third judge didn't see the view that he should have seen.
Absolutely.
I suppose you might have some sort of a case there, but I think it's highly suspect.
I think it's funny that now we have to actually have UFC has said basically now that, they have to amend their policy to make sure this doesn't happen again.
What, to have it back?
It was a split decision. It was a split decision.
Alright, well, what are they going to do to amend it? Are they going to have a backup judge? What's the solution? I don't know.
They're looking at amending the policy for all international shows because they bring in their own judges, right? It's not like, how these England shows go.
Yeah, well, again, I don't know if it's really that viable of a protest anyway. We'll see how it plays out.
UFC Fight Night 102, Derek Lewis versus Shamil Abdurakhimov.
Okay, is that to make up for the fight that Derek Lewis was supposed to have with Marcin Tybura at the show that got canceled in the Philippines?
You got it.
Well, good for him. He deserved another fight.
According to multiple reports, Vitor Belfort is not retiring.
Well, that's his own mistake to make, then.
Tatsui Kawajiri has asked for his release from the promotion.
A lot of fighters seem to be asking for their releases right now.
World Series of Fighting 34 and 35 have been canceled, and they're going to be merged into one big New York City year-end show. I asked you before about Tough 24 cage side tickets going for $350. UFC 206 in Toronto, cage side. Any guesses?
$750.
$285.
Figures I go too low on one and too high on the other.
It's cheaper to see cage side Cormier and Rumble than it is to go see the Tough 24 finale.
I'm not following the logic there at all.
Me neither. And don't give me ones in Canada, ones in the States. It's the same dollar figure they're pulling for both. So,
yeah.
The ticket prices are being reported in American dollars.
I won't make sense of it. I'll just tell you to move on.
Tim Means versus Alex Oliveira has been added to the UFC 207 show with Ronda Rousey.
I'm still a little miffed at Oliveira.
Still?
Yeah.
So Tim Means you're gonna pick him to lay a whooping?
I can't pick him solely on the basis that I don't like his opponent. We'll have to wait and see how they look on the fight, but honestly, Oliveira has got a lot to prove to me going forward because he didn't make the weight he was supposed to make, and he didn't behave how a fighter is supposed to behave. So he's got a lot of ground to make up with me right now. All
right. And we talked about this last week. Sadly, the passing away of Josh Salmon. His death has been officially ruled as a, quote, probable drug overdose.
Well, that's unfortunate, but the circumstances certainly pointed in that direction, so I can't honestly say I'm shocked. And by the way, if you want to hear from a fellow former Ultimate Fighter who is also a middleweight, Kendall Grove had a few things to say about Josh Salmon's passing, so you can check out my article on MMA Mania where he gave his thoughts.
Now, we talked about Paige Van Zandt and Karate Hottie headlining UFC Fox 22. Another fight, Brad Pickett, Uriah Faber.
Well, that's kind of a who's still relevant fight at this point.
Chang Sung Jung is returning to the promotion. He wants BJ Penn. Let's see, we'll talk about Bellator in a second. Actually, we'll talk about Bellator. There's a couple more notes I have here for Bellator. Bellator 170, the main event has been announced. January 21st.
Yes, Chael Sonnen, the American gangster, versus the Huntington Beach bad boy, Tito Ortiz.
That will be an epic fight. I don't know if that's epic good or epic bad. I'm just saying epic.
Well, it'll do a rating, which is what they care about.
And if you think that's the only Chael Sonnen fight announcement we have today, you are wrong. We're going to get Chael Sonnen and Wanderlei Silva in the summer of 2017.
Right, when his suspension ends, when Wanderlei is clear to come back.
I'm looking forward more to the Tito fight than a Wanderlei fight, but that's just me.
Isn't it ironic that they spent a whole season of Ultimate Fighter building up Sonnen versus Silva, and now it's going to happen in Bellator?
Yeah. Home of Rory McDonald to boot. I mean, it's where UFC fighters go, apparently. I don't know.
Yes, indeed.
One more note about UFC 207, and this just hit the wire. There are 2 more fights added to the big Ronda Rousey show. Brown and Safadine are going to have a tilt. And Neil Magny, Johnny Hendricks.
Oh, okay, those are 2 quality fights.
So I'm not sure what you do with Hendricks if he loses to Magny here, because that's definitely a fighter on the decline. I'm not saying Magny is a bad fighter, but if these guys are fighting 6 months or a year ago, I'd heavily favor Hendricks. But Magny, I would right now lean towards him. But then again, I don't want to discount Johnny Hendricks as a fighter with his back against the wall, because with that power, you don't ever want to discount that.
No.
All right. So before we talk about Bellator 162 this weekend, I think you have an opinion about WME IMG cutting 400 jobs from the UFC this week.
Is that really any surprise? Because you knew with new ownership, they were going to change a lot of things. They were going to fire people. They were going to cut costs. They were going to bring in their own people to do the jobs they want done. This is not really a shock. The one thing people should keep in mind is that WME IMG couldn't come up with $4 billion all on their own. They were heavily leveraged to make the acquisition of UFC. So you're going to see cost-cutting measures. You're going to see lots of high-priced tickets. You're going to see fighters complaining about their pay. You're going to see fighters complaining that they didn't get to be in title fights that they earned because they're trying to do money-drawing fights that'll sell well in the arena and do lots of pay-per-view buys. You're going to see things like this, and you're going to see a lot of unhappy people. You're going to see unhappy fighters. You're going to see unhappy employees. You're going to see a lot of turmoil.
So dark days are ahead, basically, is what you're saying.
I don't know that they're dark for fight fans, but they're dark for some people.
All right, so let's talk about this weekend's show. Bellator 162 in the FedEx Forum in Memphis, Tennessee. Shlemenko versus Grove is your headliner. Shlemenko, I had to double check this. 53-9?
Yeah, he's had a very long career, and a lot of it was outside of Bellator before he made his name there.
And, you know, I still look at Kendall Grove as a kid from Tough.
Well, you should probably think about that a little differently now, because that's been a decade ago.
I know, I'm getting old, what can I say? It's just, I always see him as the guy from Tough. It's just the way I see him, but when the door closes and the fight begins, I'm like, I'm constantly, I'll go as far as to say impressed with the career trajectory of one Kendall Grove in Bellator.
Yeah, he has improved greatly. He's won his last 2 fights by knockout. He's won 3 of his last 4. The only fight he lost was to Brandon Halsey, who he accuses of being on steroids. And coincidentally enough, Alexander Shlemenko was suspended for 3 years and got it reduced to 1 because of what? Steroids. So, Kendall Grove has a nice new nickname for him. He calls him Juice Monkey.
He should do the promo talking about anabolic steroids in Scott Hall.
Well, he does do a promo, so go to the MMA Mania article that I referenced earlier, and you can see all of his comments, and then you can click on the audio of my interview and hear all of his colorful language.
It's definitely not a PG interview.
No, I titled it Not Safe for Work for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your prediction on the fight, Peter? Who's going to win?
I'm going to say Kendall Grove.
There are reasons for you to feel that way. he does have a size advantage. He's 6'6". He's got an 80-inch reach, and Shlemenko is 5'11" and much shorter in reach than his opponent. But the problem here is that Kendall Grove has only recently become an accurate and hard-hitting striker, and he's been doing it against lesser competition than Shlemenko. So, I don't want to discount Kendall Grove's ability to use that reach, but Shlemenko, being shorter in stature, packs an awful lot of power into those muscles of his. So, if he puts one on Grove's chin, it could end quick.
Yeah, but you could say that about a bunch of fighters on this card, especially the co-main event.
That is certainly true. Well, let's talk about that co-main event. Bobby Lashley and Josh Appelt. It's Bobby Lashley. Lord knows that dude is stacked and jacked and completely natural as far as we know, because he's not failing any tests in Bellator.
Well, I look at this fight as, Bobby Lashley, 14-2. I'm not going to say, a win here really puts him in a title picture, but a win here, a decisive knockout, not a decision, anything but a decision here. A dominant performance by Bobby Lashley.
No pun on his nickname, right?
No pun on the nickname at all. I would say puts him,
honestly, at this point, if
one
Lashley...
or two fights away from a title shot?
At this point, if Lashley wins, it should be Lashley versus Congo for the vacant title.
Whoa, I'm not ready to do that. I think he's one or two fights away from a Congo fight, but, a dominant win here would definitely put him in the conversation, but I wouldn't anoint him the next number one contender.
Okay, but Lashley hasn't lost in, years now.
Yeah.
He's gone on a run. He's undefeated in Bellator, and they are short on quality heavyweights to fill the vacancy for the title right now. So my question is, if it's not Congo and Lashley, who else is it going to be? And quite frankly, how much more does Lashley have to prove after 7 wins in a row?
Yeah. The cupboard's pretty bare, I suppose.
The only other thing you could even throw in there as possibly an argument would be Matt Mitrione, and that's only because he has a name coming in off of UFC, but the other heavyweights in Bellator I talk to don't want him jumping to the head of the line just because of that.
No, you don't jump to the headline because you have a name unless your name is Rousey, I suppose, but, yeah, you make a good argument there that the cupboard's pretty bare.
Congo and Lashley are the two guys that stand out right now.
Yeah. Well, hopefully he wins, but I don't want to discount the opponent here, Josh Appelt.
Yeah, Appelt is a former champion, not in Bellator, but he does have a title, the WFC Heavyweight Championship, which he vacated to come here, and he was also previously a Gladiator Challenge Heavyweight Champion, so it's not like this guy hasn't won some accomplishments in his career, but he's also facing arguably a greater opponent than most of the others that he's faced.
All right, what about Hisaki Kato against AJ Matthews?
Well, AJ Matthews is a guy with a ton of potential and a ton of inconsistency. He wins 2, he loses 2, he wins 2, he loses 2. So it's really hard to get a handle on the guy as to what kind of fighter he's going to be. I think AJ Matthews could be great, but he doesn't have a great record right now at 8-5. Whereas Hisaki Kato, he's a quality striker, but he's also a live by the sword, die by the sword guy. He's won 6 by knockout, he's lost 2 by knockout. So the one thing you can count on with him is he's going to go out there and deliver excitement. You're not going to get a boring fight with him.
No. You must have been looking at my notes for AJ Matthews because all I could write was Jekyll and Hyde, Jekyll and Hyde, Jekyll and Hyde.
That is pretty much the story of his career, and the pattern, if you follow it, would suggest that he's due for another win, but I don't think Kato is the man to give him that win. I think he probably goes in there and hits him with a spinning back fist or a Superman punch, one of those trademark strikes that he likes to hit. And I think AJ Matthews probably goes lights out.
Okay, let's talk about Ryan Couture and Gori Yamauchi.
Well, they both need to get some momentum going because they're both coming in off losses. Yamauchi had his 3-fight win streak snapped by Bubba Jenkins, and Couture had his win streak snapped by a knockout punch from Patricky Pitbull Frere.
Oh, I forgot about that, yeah.
So they each need the win here to get back on track. But I think Yamauchi, being a very good submission artist and Couture being a decent submission artist, I think if they both go to the ground, I think Yamauchi has the edge.
Alright, so let's go into Ricky Rainey and Gilbert Smith. This fight I'm very curious about, to be honest.
Have you checked out my Gilbert Smith interview?
Not yet.
Well, please do, because he is another one who is very opinionated and colorful in expressing himself, and he's got a colorful nickname to boot, Chocolate Thunder. He's a very entertaining interview. I thoroughly enjoyed my chat with him.
Well, I'm picking Gilbert Smith to win because I'm really impressed with his last few fights, and I think Ricky Rainey is an excellent test for him.
I still think he won that Fernando Gonzalez fight.
Still think so?
Yeah.
You still think so, yeah?
I told him so in the interview. I said, I think he got robbed by the judges. And he said, it's my own fault for not finishing him. I gave the judges the opportunity to make that call. I should have never let it happen. I should have never let it go to the judges. This time I'm not going to let the judges get a chance because Rick Rainey, he's not even going to get out of the first round. He's going to be finished.
So we should almost say friend of the show due to the tagline.
I guess so.
Alright, there's one other fight I want to talk about. Why is there a name on here? I want to say here, Stevie, help me out here.
Well, what name are you referring to in particular? I'm not quite sure right now.
There's a fighter with a famous name. I'm trying to remember who it is.
You're not
His
talking
debut
about
fight.
Virgil Swicker and Dan Charles, then?
No.
You're not talking about Steve Garcia and Ronnie Lawrence, then?
No.
You're talking about Baby Slice.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, his pro debut against Rick Bing.
I'm very curious for this fight more than anything else because, I mean, it would have meant more if his father was still around, but unfortunately that didn't happen. It can't happen, I should say. I don't know what to make of this fight. I'm not sure if it's good or bad. I'm sure he's a talented fighter, but I'm not sure what to expect. Does that make sense?
Well, you can expect that his father, the late Kimbo Slice, he got into mixed martial arts late in his career after already becoming renowned as a street fighter. So Kimbo could have been a really good MMA fighter if he'd gotten that start at the very beginning of his career, but instead he just became an okay
journeyman?
He was an attraction.
Okay.
Journeyman is not quite the word I want to use because that would imply Kimbo had nothing to offer. He was never going to be the greatest MMA fighter of all time, but he was an attraction. Now, the difference here is that since his son is getting trained from the jump and not having to learn it late in life, he could, in fact, be something really special. I'm not saying greatest of all time because we've never seen him fight, so there's no way anybody could even begin to say that. But you'll want to see what he looks like in this fight to see if he can take his dad's legacy and go further with it.
I think this first fight will be very telling in the career. I mean, he can come out and start blasting, or he might get blasted. I just don't know. It's like that CM Punk fight where you're not sure if it's going to be A or B.
Oh, I think we all knew what that CM Punk fight was going to be.
Okay, fair enough. But you can see my argument, though, where you're not sure what side of the coin it's going to fall on.
No, but I would suspect that he's been training in a very orthodox, well-grounded approach with the Body Shop and the McKees, so I don't think young Ferguson has too much to worry about in doing things the right way. So it's all up to him to apply those skills inside the Bellator cage.
And that's going to do it for the show this week. Stevie, we're in a lull right now because The only thing on the schedule next week is RFA 45. For Stevie J, I'm Peter H., the Hardcore Canadian. Thanks for listening, and as I always say, never leave it to the judges. Good night, everybody.